Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Welcome, Pacesetters of Agribusiness, to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod, where we amplify voices from across the industry, aggregate perspectives, and elevate our collective thinking around strategy execution. I'm your host, Joe Mosier, and I appreciate you choosing to spend your time with us today. A quick reminder before today's episode to like and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. You can take a moment to do it right now. And if you're so inclined, at the end of today's episode, we would love it if you consider leaving us a review and letting us know how we're doing. Now, today's episode is part 2 of a 3-part mini-series we're doing here at the end of the year, focused on better activation of strategy, commonly referred to as strategic planning, which is a process label and branding that I'm not fond of. And if you listened to last week, you'll know all about why that is. But not only just activating strategy in a more effective way, but also what agribusiness leaders need to be thinking about to get better results from the investment of time and energy that they are making in the strategy development and activation process. Listening to part 1 is by no means mandatory, but today will build upon some of the observations and discussions from last week. And so if you haven't listened to it yet, I do encourage you either now or after today's episode to go back and check it out. It's a short 16-minute episode. So if last week was dedicated to airing all of my grievances with the word choice of strategic planning versus what I think is a more apt strategy activation process, and if it was all about talking about all the problems that flow from this misbranding, today we're going to talk about the process itself. And cutting to the chase, I think the conventional process of strategic planning, I hold my nose when I say it, strategic planning is broken. So let's talk, as I break down, let's talk about the major elements of a strategic planning process. We'll sit down, we'll be in an offsite, probably for like 2 or 3 days. There's some folks that are excited because they love this kind of stuff. Some people that are reluctantly there know that it's important, but don't really want to be there. Some folks that are literally reading the pre-reads as they walk into the room in the morning. We'll sit down, and over the course of the workshop, we'll talk about the internal state of the company. We'll talk about the external conditions in which the company operates. We'll catalog all the risks, all the opportunities. We'll brainstorm some things that we think we can do about those risks and opportunities. And then we'll probably get to the work of assigning people to work on them. We'll do this, as I said, in probably a marathon offsite. We're going to document this with exhaustive slides. We're going to do this with minimal or no opportunity to actually digest the information, to get perspectives from people that are not in the room, direct reports, and deeper in the organization. We will certainly identify some initiatives. Some will be good, some will be maybe less good. Some will be relevant, some not so much. We'll assign some people, often the same people, to work on multiple efforts. And we'll probably, maybe we won't, but we probably won't have a very good mechanism for actually measuring the strategic fit or the alignment of those initiatives that we've selected down to back against the underlying strategy. We'll be able to explain it for sure, but we won't have a good quantitative way of saying, here's how this particular basket of things that we want to do drive the strategy. They're equally distributed across all of our strategic objectives, and they're going to have these kinds of impacts. This is why we think these are the right things to focus on. And despite all that, some of the stuff that we're missing, we will walk out, and while we'll be tired, we'll be pretty excited about it. The problem is the process is broken, and you're not going to get the results that you expect from this. One of the main culprits in this process, there's many, but one of the main culprits is a process called SWOT. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. I will briefly, sort of at a high level, break this down for the random folks that maybe haven't been involved in a SWOT. It's a 2x2 grid. Like I said, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Strengths and weaknesses are the thing that the company is really good at, or the thing that the company is not very good at. It's brainstorming. It's a bit of discussion. It's a lot of sticky notes. There's probably some white paper and some flip chart or butcher paper involved. But we'll document down a lot of things that we believe we're good at, we've been good at in the past, we think we're good at now. And then similarly, the things that we've been weak at in the past, things we're weak at now. And not always a whole lot of introspection into why we're good at that, why we're not good at it, and how it even matters. Is it even related to the strategy we have today? After we look inside the four walls of the business, we'll start to look outside. We'll talk about opportunities and threats. What are the opportunities available to us? What have a couple of customers asked for? What have we seen the competition doing? What's an article we read that we got excited about? What's something we used to do that we stopped doing that maybe now we could do again? All the kinds of opportunities. And we'll do the same thing with the threats. Where's the competition kicking our butt? Where are they threatening to kick our butt? Where do we believe that they're going to kick our butt? Whatever it is. And again, we'll do a lot of brainstorming. We'll have some discussion. We'll document a lot of stuff. We may or may not actually tie this back to the strategy. And this is one of the main issues. I think SWOT far too often, despite the simplistic nature and how it kind of focuses attention on these core areas and asks important questions, to be sure, I think it kind of becomes frivolous navel gazing after a while because it's constrained, it's bound by all the cognitive biases and the perspectives of this leadership team sitting in the room where they've all got a lot of very similar experiences. They talk about some of the same challenges all the time. They talk about the opportunities all the time. I don't often see a lot of new things come out of the process for a couple of reasons. One, I too often, and see this when we challenge people in the process, things are stated as facts when in fact they are assumptions. This thing is true. We're losing business to this particular competitor. We're shedding volume in this particular area. We state them as facts. They're either assumptions or beliefs. And we don't really get into challenging them. The discussions, the things that make it to the SWOT board are often anchored to the unspoken biases of, again, what you believe to be true. We believe we're good at this. We believe we're less good at this, etc. Often without rooting it in any sort of the underlying, how do we really know? And it oftentimes, this is probably my biggest beef with it, is that it reconfirms what the group already believed. The fringe beliefs, the edge cases, the things at the margins, or maybe just a small subset or an individual in the group believes, they might make it to the board as part of the brainstorming. They don't make it to the final set of inputs because it's just one person and it can be explained away. SWOT is prone to set you on a course that is also not tethered or anchored to the destination defined in your strategy. Sometimes I see teams do this well, where they say, okay, look, what are the strengths we have relative to the strategic objectives we have before us? And they do a very good job of keeping that tightly bound. But far too often, you have your strategy and it's set off to the side and you talk about what you're good at completely separate from it. Oftentimes stepping right past the very obvious issue that you might be really, really good at doing a whole set of things that are not tomorrow's problems. And therefore, they're not actually additive to your strategy. They're not accretive to the value that you want to bring back to the balance sheet or to ownership. They just don't matter. And so I think this lack of anchoring to strategy, to the future destination you're working towards, the vision for the organization, is one of the biggest problems with SWOT. And frankly, spoiler alert here, we don't use SWOT in our process. We've just seen too much time with too many disappointing results to feel like it's an effective use of our clients' time, and we've just simply abandoned it.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
Now, stepping back from SWOT specifically, because SWOT is not the rot of the strategic planning process overall. There's several other things. Another observation that I have is I sometimes feel like the strategic planning process is over-engineered. And again, let's get back to some of the logistics of it. You take the management team offsite for 2 to 3 days. Sometimes it's more even. And it feels good, right? You're separating yourself from the day-to-day. You might go to some kind of a cool location that kind of reinvigorates the team, some team building exercises, some bigger thinking. But what it does is it shoehorns all this really important, future-focused, forward-oriented thinking, it shoehorns it into an artificially short window. And that short window is divorced from the ever-evolving needs of the business. You sometimes see in these short windows, people spend a lot of time doing, I would say, we can call it analysis, but it's often discussion of some set of stats that's duplicative of strategy. They jump into this detailed plan build out. They jump into really rigorous resource planning, but all of it without an ability to objectively demonstrate, again, why these specific initiatives are the right ones to invest in. So you pull people out for a long time. You do this SWOT that is maybe not necessarily additive to the strategy. You dig right into, here's the things that we want to do, and here's who's going to do it. And it's kind of no wonder that sometimes a year or two later, companies find that they're not meaningfully closer to the destination than they started out at, despite a lot of effort, right? But effort doesn't necessarily equal impact. Impact is where you see how close you're getting, how you're moving in the right direction. And the output of these offsites often says it all. A really long slide deck. It's almost sometimes as if the number of slides that were discussed in an offsite is a proxy for the strength of thinking or the probability of the plan's success. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And then when you walk out of that room after 3 days and the team is exhausted, but they feel aligned, whether it's because of true conviction or they just simply got, sort of arm-barred into agreeing, whatever it is, they walk out of there with this slide deck and these objectives, these initiatives, these resource plans. And because it's codified and it's packaged and it's been approved by management, maybe not yet by the board, but by management, then is sometime after that is probably the first time the folks not in the room, the masses, all the people that will help actually activate and execute, that's the first time that they'll see it. And so you kind of get a sense of how this whole thing, maybe suboptimal at inception, and then focus in all the wrong areas and not enough time and not enough the right involvement, you kind of see how once it's all perfectly printed and formatted and it's been 3-hole punch and it fits perfectly into the binder, if you ever wonder why that binder gets stuck on a shelf, it's because the shelf is the perfect home for the binder, and your binder is not actually how you activate strategy in the organization. Now, the last thing I'll say about this is, while I think the process is perhaps broken through use of SWOT and perhaps over-engineered in terms of how long you take people off site and the way they focus and the kind of the formality around it, there's also some underinvestments in the way strategic planning, really strategy activation, is done. Activating and executing strategy is not episodic. It's not a point in time. So why would the planning that puts the pieces in place, that gets your men and your women and your technology and your services and all of it in position, why would that all be episodic? We need to extend the duration of the process and shorten the offsites. When you do this, this allows for enthusiasm to build, but also for resistance to simmer and marinate between leadership team interactions. It allows, when people walk out of the room and they're excited or resistant to an idea, for that excitement and resistance to sort of eventually crystallize into topics of good, meaningful discussion with clarity of thought for the next time you're all together. Not all the opportunities or all the threats are also obvious to the team the first time that they discuss it. Sometimes it's the second, or even frustratingly, the third time you look at something, you realize, oh, there's a critical flaw here. Either a flaw in we have failed to account for something that could send us sideways, or we have overstepped or stepped right past a very obvious opportunity that is at our fingertips and we should go get first. Time is what heals that. Time is what allows those ideas to kind of come into focus and for people to digest them and discuss them, get comfortable with them, and then ultimately champion it. Also, I don't think a sprint approach, the 2 to 3 to 4 day offsite, it doesn't give any opportunity for members of your management team to test some of the ideas with key members of the team that are not in those rooms. A sales leader can't take some of the ideas around product positioning, new customer segments, new products or services, whatever it might be. They don't have time to take some of those ideas to key members of their team and kind of hear what they have to say. And why wouldn't you want to hear what they have to say? Why wouldn't you have fingerprints from more people closer to the business, closer to the customers on the plan? It also, similarly doesn't allow the operations lead to go back and get feedback from the department heads that they lead. How will this change in our operating model? This change in the way we do order fulfillment, how is that going to impact our available storage, our inventory turnover, our logistical capacity, the investments required, staffing implications? This is what time allows. We'll talk more about it here in the next episode on what we mean by more time, but it's breaking apart that assumed 2 to 3 day offsite and saying, what if we got together for less than a day, 4 or 5 times over the course of a couple of months? What if we prolonged this process in service of more input, more learning, more understanding, more commitment, more conviction, and then ultimately more alignment around what we're trying to do? When we go fast in these processes, we fall victim to self-inflicted urgency. Because let's be clear, unless you have a hard deadline for a board retreat, there's no hard and fast rule for a strategic plan, for a plan of strategy activation. And if you do have a hard deadline of this plan is going to have capital implications, and our board expects to have the chance to see it, to understand it, to ask questions before they ultimately approve capital allocation. If you do have that hard deadline, just start earlier. Give yourself the luxury of time. It will manifest as a better plan, more closely reflective of the strategic choices that you've made in your underlying strategy. This is your opportunity to ensure that you're creating the connective tissue between the strategic outcomes that you want that are set forth in your strategy with the initiatives that you're choosing to pursue. The connective tissue articulates for you and for the board and for others, not just what you're proposing to do, but why they are the right ones. One of the biggest challenges in this process is you will have a flood of really compelling, very sound, and objectively very good ideas. Not all good ideas should get approved. Not every great investment gets capital. The merit of an individual opportunity is not the threshold for it being in or out of the plan. It's the strategic fit and alignment of that idea relative to the many other opportunities that are available. So something can actually be deprioritized for the coming year and still be a slam dunk idea, but you as a leader have to make choices. You need to have the discipline to select the best options and have the ability to articulate that to others. Why this is the best option, what the impact is, why this, not that. And that's something we're going to talk about next week and how we do that with our clients. So if that sounds like a gap in your process, or maybe the obvious nature of why we're doing these 10 things becomes less obvious when you leave that offsite and present it to the masses, and there's a lot of questions, we have some ways to help with that. And here's the other part. It needs to be on a single page. Now, that might seem weirdly bureaucratic or down in the weeds, but there is a cleansing effect that happens when you force down to an 8x11 sheet of paper what you intend to do over the next 3 to 5 years. The practice of getting it to its simplest but defensible form, it's cleansing. It washes away the garbage and the fluff, and you focus on what you really want to say. No one gets paid for having the best plan, the objectively best plan on paper. They get rewarded on the work the plan identifies to produce the outcomes the business strategy requires. And having this also in its simplest, clearest, most direct, and defensible form also positions you well to carry the message again to those that are not in the room, to those that were not in the process. So while I recognize that the process of setting strategy might be for the selective few of the organization, the work of activation and execution of the strategy is for the masses. And the single page mindset is a forcing function to design your plan to meet the needs of those who must get on board and do the hard work to make it come true. That's all for today. That's part 2 of our Activating Strategy miniseries, part 2 of 3. I want to say thank you for listening to this program and today's episode. Again, as I said last week, I think this is terribly important. I could go on for much longer. I'm choosing to really constrain myself here. But I hope this is of value to you, and I never take the time that you spend listening to this podcast for granted. And if it was of value to you, I'd love it if you'd consider sharing this with others who you think would find similar benefit. particularly if they're in the agribusiness industry. And of course, if you're so inclined, please consider leaving us a review. Let us know how we're doing. Reach out to me and let me know how this is helping your business or what you need to hear more of for us to do a better job of helping you get better at strategy execution. I deeply appreciate you being part of the Pacesetter Pod community, for taking the time to listen, to consider, and to action ways to improve strategy in support of growing your agribusiness. I look forward to having you join us again right here on the Pacesetter Pod.
This is the podcastfactory.com.